Here we have an altarpiece that was probably cut up at a later date. It was probably a single panel instead of the three we see here. So we're just going to focus on these three panels at the top and not the ones at the bottom. They were painted by an artist from Florence called Fra Angelico. So he was a Dominican friar and an amazing painter. And he painted this probably in about the 1430s. And what we see here is a scene known as the Last Judgment. So we have the figure of Jesus here seated front and center in what's known as a mandorla, which is that almond-shaped form, almost like a portal to another world. And indeed, he's presiding over a kind of tribunal. And here we see the saints in heaven sitting on either side. There's a group of angels. And below, on the ground, on this day of judgment, the tombs have opened up. And so the souls are coming out of their tombs.
This is interesting because it isn't an event in the life of Christ, unlike most of the other things we've looked at. It's based on a teaching. The nearest thing in the Bible is a teaching of Jesus, which is recorded in the 25th chapter of Matthew's Gospel in the Bible, where he says, speaking of himself, when the Son of Man comes with all his angels, and we see so many of them here, to judge the earth, he will take his seat on a throne of glory, and we see that here too, and he will gather all the nations in front of him, and like a shepherd separating sheep and goats, he'll separate out the people. And the goats, who represent those who are sinners, are directed to his left, and the sheep, who represent the righteous, are directed to his right. And that's just what we're seeing here, isn't it?
Yes, and we even see that reflected in Jesus's gesture. He's raising up the blessed with one hand, and he's condemning the damned in the other. And you'll notice that he's looking towards the damned, and that draws our eyes right down to who is being condemned here. And you can see in and amongst all this variety of people, there are members of the clergy. You can even see there's a man there wearing the hat of a bishop. So we're imagining these are contemporaries of Fra Angelico, so there's a bit of a criticism here.
Yes. I think that captures a very interesting aspect of this, because both the teaching of Jesus and works of art that draw upon it are, in a sense, not so much description of some event at the end of the world as their calls to action to people now, to viewers who see them now. And for some, that would have been a very uncomfortable experience, and I think it was meant to be. You were meant to think about how you might indeed be one of the goats directed to the left. But in lots of ways also, I think it was an encouraging thing to see what's promised to the righteous, the glory that's promised to the righteous. And if you did live in a world where you suffered frequent injustices, the idea of a final reckoning might be something you really look forward to, a moment of liberation, actually, from all the things that oppress you in this current state of the world.
What I love here is some of these promises to the righteous, as you've described them, are shown here in the side of the blessed. So you have these angels greeting the souls and bringing them up into paradise, which we see here on the left-hand side. And here you'll see the angels guiding these figures up to paradise. And you'll notice that quite a few of them are wearing the habits of the Dominican order. And that also seems to reflect where this object may originally have been installed, in a Dominican church, perhaps made for a Dominican patron, but also by an artist who belonged to that order. And you'll notice at the very top of paradise here, there are two figures, one in a papal tiara, that elaborate hat, and another in a flat red hat. And it's thought that at least one of them may have commissioned this artwork and has had himself painted in rather cleverly on the side of the blessed.
A fortunate place to be. Jesus' description of the Last Judgment as this separating out also involves the description of a series of encounters that both the righteous and sinners have had with the most vulnerable and needy people in their environment. And they're judged by how they treated those needy people, those who are hungry or thirsty or in prison or strangers. And Jesus said that in your encounters with these vulnerable people, you were in fact encountering me. And if you treated them well, you treated me well. If you treated them badly, you treated me badly. And I think that is a wonderful invitation to look for Christ here, not only in that glorious throne up at the top, but also in the people down below. He's there too. And I love the embraces, the tenderness of the embraces of those on the left-hand side, which show that mutuality, that helping each other along, and the angels are also joining in. Whereas the figures on the right are either completely turned in on themselves, with no sense of those around them, or actually devouring each other, sometimes literally.
And you'll notice at the very center, there's one soul that has tried to sneak over to the side of the blessed and is being compelled back by an angel, back to the side of the condemned. This painted panel was probably created as an altarpiece, so we see scenes of the Last Judgment as altarpieces, but more often we see them painted on an enormous scale, filling a whole wall, and very often as the exit wall as we leave a church. So we are reminded to keep all of this in mind when we go about our everyday, how we treat other people. And so it's the last thing we see before we exit. And it seems a really appropriate subject to end this series on the life of Jesus Christ on this subject and with this artwork.